Tottenham Hotspur are normally seen as one of the bigger clubs in, of course, the Premier League, despite the fact that in recent times success has been, let's say, on short shrift because they haven't really won a trophy since the mid-2000s. And despite the fact that under Mauricio Pochettino, they came very close to becoming a consistent challenger in both domestic trophies as well as making it to the Champions League on a regular basis, they haven't really kicked on from the next level ever since they sacked the Argentine manager. And in recent times, they've hit new lows because not only did they end up sacking Antonio Conte, they also recently ended up sacking Christian Stellini, the man who was in fact his assistant coach and who had been placed in interim care of the club. And in fact now they've moved to another interim appointment in Ryan Mason, someone who also held that job previously when they had sacked Jose Mourinho. If that sounds like a bit of a confusing circus, well, that's because that's really just how things have been at Tottenham Hotspur. And really, truth be told, all of it can be traced back to one particular moment which could have been transformative for the club, ended up doing the exact opposite. That moment, of course, was the 2019 UEFA Champions League final, which they had made it to, and they lost rather tamely to Liverpool. That was seen as probably the highest point of the Mauricio Pochettino era, and everyone knew that if they had to come closer to doing something similar, they'd have needed more expenditure and potentially some movings in and out of the squad. That did not happen at all, and unfortunately what it did was, rather than take them the next step, it's seen them regress further down the table to the point where at this point Spurs seem a bit lost. Now, why exactly is that the case? Well, again, there's three major reasons which you can look at, and one of them is, of course, a departure from a model that was working so well for them. Remember, their model was very simple. They would look to bring in players on the relative cheap and develop them into top class players. Then eventually, if one or two of them wanted to move on, they'd move them on and bring in newer players. It was a model that worked well because Spurs, despite actually being regulars in the Champions League, didn't quite have the financial might to contend with clubs like, say, City, Chelsea, Liverpool, United and the likes. That was in fact something that really worked well for them, and they've departed from that a lot in recent seasons, which ties into the second role, or the second point, which is that there's no clarity when it comes to hiring a manager or who to put in the hot seat. After Mauricio Pochettino, someone who took a long-term view of building things, they've had two managers who are fixated on short-term success and short-term success only, in first Jose Mourinho and then Antonio Conte. That is a bit of a problem because whilst many thought that they needed someone who could bring in a win now mentality, because now the club were at that point where they could really push on for trophies, that hasn't quite happened yet. In fact, they've regressed, and what's worse is, from departing from their successful model to actually try to cater to the whims and fancies of their new managers, they've only ended up making things more muddled and more worse, which then of course ties in to the third point, which is they have managed to actually open up the purse strings and maybe bring in a few new players, but it hasn't been without too much of a plan, and it's been erratic. On one hand, they've looked to bring in quote-unquote short-term signings that their managers would have wanted. That's why you've seen players like Ivan Perisic signed, despite the fact that he's past 30, and you've seen also other wingbacks signed who of course weren't in fact part of Conte's plans at all, and whom Conte described as club signings. So the club wanted to sign players that they thought could be developed, and Conte wanted players who could quote-unquote win now. The similar thing happened with Mourinho, where there had to be some sort of a balance struck between, of course, bringing in players that the manager wanted and also trying to kind of balance the books a little bit. All of these things have worked out to be a bit of a muddle really for the club, and truth be told, it's something that the club have actually in some ways acknowledged, because you remember at the end of the 2020-21 season, when fans for the last game week of the Premier League were actually welcomed back into stadiums. Ahead of that rather momentous occasion, Spurs CEO Daniel Levy had actually put out a rather interesting message in the matchday notes, and among one of those was the fact that he tacitly acknowledged that they made mistakes and that they wouldn't be doing something similar again. This is what he said, and they're pretty prophetic words when you look at it. This is what he said. He said, "We are acutely aware of the need to select someone whose values reflect those of our great club and return to playing football with the style for which we are known, free-flowing, attacking and entertaining, whilst continuing to embrace our desire to see young players flourish from our academy alongside experienced talent." This is what he said at the end of the 2020-21 season, and after that he went out and hired Antonio Conte. I don't understand how it is that this club functions, because if you're saying something like this, then it would seem that you'd want someone more along the Pochettino, let's say, mold. Not necessarily the same man, maybe someone who has a similar idea of building things long term, not Conte, who's a win now manager, and they went for Conte anyway. So what they've done is they've essentially set themselves 2 years back by going for managers who guaranteed them success instead of people who could have actually helped build things further. Because truth be told, the era of win now is very much over, really. Yes, you do still have a few managers, like Mourinho is still employed. Conte, you can be sure, will eventually get employment somewhere else. But generally speaking, you're seeing a lot of success in football nowadays come about from clubs who plan long term. It's no coincidence that Bayern Munich have won 10 straight Bundesligas on the trot. Neither was it when Juventus won pretty much 9 Bundesligas on the trot. Even if you look at England, someone like a Manchester City, a Liverpool, have been some of the most successful clubs in recent times. They've done everything with a long-term vision and long-term planning in mind. It's not just about the now, it's about what happened in the past and also what happened in the future. And Spurs, if they are to be a successful side or hope to be challenging regularly for those top 4 spots, they'll need to embrace that sort of an ethos rather than slip back to the win now kind of mentality that has taken over the club. And that is really the only way forward for them, because quite frankly, if you have to be a win now club, you need big resources. They don't have that. They will have to focus on something that works for them, and whether or not they can get a manager who can actually do that, that's going to be the next challenge. Because if they do, then they have some chance of maybe being a force in a year or two. If not, they're going to continue sliding down the Premier League table. Thank you guys so much for joining us on this video. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget, like it, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel, tap that bell icon, leave us a comment, follow us on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and don't forget to download the AajTak app as well. Plus, if you're already on the channel, go ahead, check out some other videos that we've done. For now, from my side, goodbye.